This is North Pod, a North Melbourne fan podcast, hosted by Jason Hunt.
Stephenson with his own moves. Carrington. North are in front.
Well, hello and welcome to episode 2 of the North Pod podcast, coming to you live after a belting at the hands of the Brisbane Lions, unfortunately. No other way of putting that. It was a 75-point drubbing at the hands of Brisbane, with the final score being 152 to 77. Yeah, I mean, it was a disappointing way for that match to go. It was a really tough second half to watch. It really fell apart during that, about halfway through that third quarter. Brisbane just got a run on and we weren't able to stop them. So yeah, I mean, it was a tough watch for a North Melbourne fan, I'm sure. We made a fast start, got out to a 3-goal lead. Looked like it could have been a bit of a shootout, and it was. Except North Melbourne just stopped shooting about halfway through that third quarter, and yeah, the floodgates opened. It was a tough watch for that last sort of 45 minutes. So yeah, I mean, the story of the game, I think, was our defensive structure was just torn apart. We were consistently beaten in the contested ball, particularly in the middle of the ground. I think we lost contested ball pretty comfortably, and then yeah, they just got at the back of our defensive structures. So too often they got past that first line of defence, and often that was sort of kick from about 50 metres out from our goal, and they either got a mark or they got advantage from that point, and then just got out the back and just found uncontested marks behind our defence. They took 33 marks inside 50, which, is about 20 more than a normal. I think the average is something like 12 or 13 for a side to take marks inside 50. They took 33, and a lot of those were uncontested, just inside forward 50, because they'd got out the back, because they had found the space out the back and just leapfrogged us. And generally it was a player had gambled, so someone had come up to try and make the play and stop it. They've come off their man. It's caused a flow-on effect and resulted in sort of easy possessions and easy scores for Brisbane. And Mackay looked really rusty and out of sorts playing in that system. It was his first proper match of the year. He played the practice games and then had his foot injury for the last month or so, and he had a lot of trouble playing in front of his defender or in front of his opposition. I thought made some bad reads or made some late decisions that cost him. So yeah, I mean that was the story of the game. I thought that's what ended up costing us the 75-point loss overall. Just that team defense, which we talked a little bit about last week, was really shaky. So before I go any further, I just want to please encourage you to share this with any North Melbourne fans that get the word out there. I'm on pretty much every podcast platform under the sun now, so leave me a review if you can, give me a rating, and yeah, just really, really keen to hear feedback on the podcast, what the listeners want to hear. So subscribe to me on those podcast services and get involved with my social accounts on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, etc. Just search for @NorthPodShow or @NorthPod, and just want to chat about the footy and get the show out there. So please share me with any North Melbourne fans that you might be interested in listening to me. Probably, I mean, it looks like it's gonna be a long season if it goes down this route again. So it could be a few like this where it just feels a bit, like, what are we doing? But anyway, here we are. So let's continue looking at the bad from the match. That's going to be our structure. We'll have a look at what didn't work. We'll have a look at what did work, look at some news, and then look ahead to next week. And as I already mentioned, I'm not going to go over it too much, that the defence was just horrific. I think it just needs time. I think Clarko is probably going to have to be patient with it. We're obviously trying a new structure of defence than we've played in the past, and it looks really shaky. And the signs were there all game. Like, I know the scores were level at quarter time, but they were getting out the back from the start of the game. It was just that we were scoring in quarter 1 too, and that sort of dried up as the match went on. And yeah, I mean, it was structural, and it was also decision making based. Like McDonald and Mackay, I guess I'm calling them out. Well, they weren't the only ones, but there was a couple of either poor decisions or decisions that were probably like not bad decisions, but they just they weren't able to execute, and that resulted in that team defence falling apart and Brisbane getting those uncontested possessions out the back. So I think it's a couple of weeks in a row where it's looked like that. Certainly it looked really bad against Brisbane, and it didn't look great against Carlton either. So I think it's going to be interesting to see if Clarko kind of continues to experiment with this, or if he needs to tweak things for the time being, because it didn't look good at all today. Danaher and Hipwood were just getting out the back for cheap possessions and kicked, I think, 9 between them. So we've really could have kicked more if they'd kicked accurately later on in the game. So that's something that we're going to have to continue to work on. And just building on that, my second bad was, Aiden Core was just ragdolled in defence, particularly by Hipwood and Darcy Fort. I know that he's giving away 10 centimetres to both of them, so I'm not expecting him to outmark them, but he's got to make more of a contest than he did today. It was just, he was consistently outmarked by one or both of them in kind of situations where the ball's not coming in at a great advantage to them. Like I'd say were solid 50-50s and he was just outmarked. I really thought that having Mackay and Logue come back in would, free him up to kind of play more of his natural game. He was disappointing today. I like Core generally speaking. I think he's a solid player for us, but today, he's got to be better than he was today. So I'm hoping that we can see more from him in the future. I think I was a bit surprised when he was left out from that round 1 team, and I sort of told myself, well, I think maybe this is just, Clarko wanted to give him a run in the VFL to kind of, get some fitness because he'd been a bit injured in the preseason. But potentially Clarko's not stoked with the way he's playing and thinks that Logan Mackay is enough height there. I'm not sure. But yeah, he didn't look good today, and maybe Bonner's worth another go. I know he was only in last week because we're missing both of those key pillars, but Core was ragdolled today, unfortunately. The next bad thing, just the forward structure was pretty rubbish after quarter 1, to be honest. And most of the game really was a similar story to last week, where Brisbane were able to find those free players forward of the ball, whereas we were just bombing it long to a contest that was usually sort of 5 or 6 players. Or I thought in the second half we kind of adjusted and we did less of that, but we just had no option. We had no free players option, so we were often overhandballing it in the middle. And that resulted in several turnovers, and it sort of looked like the players are just mucking around with it, but they just had no good options to kick it to. So I think, that first half we did a lot of long bombs to Larkey and Comben, and often both in the same spot, which is not ideal, and often lost those contests, and it was rebounded quickly. And in the second half, I thought we adjusted and tried to be a bit more methodical, but the options just weren't there, and we often turned it over, just fiddling around with handballs. Larkey and Zerha had virtually no impact between them. Larkey got a goal out the back in the first quarter, and that was it between the two of them. Zerha had a big tackle, and that was about it. He gave away a couple of silly free kicks. And I really hope that Larkey isn't right, so to speak. Like he didn't look himself again today. Yeah, he didn't look good, to be honest. It was thoroughly beaten by Payne, just outmarked several times. So that forward structure didn't look great. The next bad thing was just, and I think I said it last week, like our one wood, and something that we have been good at over the last couple of years has been our clearance work, and we were beaten at the centre clearances today, particularly once Simkin left the game. So he looks like he's broken his finger or broken his hand. He was subbed out around half time, and once he left, he was kind of our best midfield grunt player today, and he wasn't there in the second half, unfortunately. Once he left, it was just Brisbane who were relatively dominant. It wasn't a smashing, but they certainly got the better of the clearances and the centre clearances. Neil just seemed to do what he wanted. He had 13 clearances and 10 of them were centre clearances. And that really drove that run on in the third quarter. And it didn't matter who was winning the ruck contests. Goldie tapped it down to Neil several times and he ran away with it. He seemed to shark it really well and read our hit outs. And he's a good player, don't get me wrong, but I really would have loved to see Cunnington and LDU just put a bit more of a hand on him or across him, particularly in those centre clearances. There was several times where we set up kind of, I think, not assuming that we're going to win the ball, but I would have liked to see more defensive structure, I think, of the centre clearances because Neil just did as he pleased, really. And yeah, that third quarter was all driven by the centre clearances and those turnovers in the corridor from us just over handballing it. And that's really where the game was completely lost. Because, halfway through that third quarter, I think we were maybe 23 points down, something like that. So it wasn't like we were about to win the game or anything, but it wasn't a 75-point drubbing at that point. It was just, that contested ball. Another unfortunate thing was just some of that real simple stuff. The example that I'm giving here is that there was late in the third quarter, about sort of half-back flank, Logs picked up a loose ball, gives a hand pass to Sheasel, and then didn't shepherd for Sheasel, didn't let him know that he was hot, and Sheasel got ran down and got done for holding the ball. Now, it's I think it probably was a tough spot for him to put on a good shepherd, but he made no attempt to shepherd and then just appeared to let Sheasel run. So I think that one was on Logue, and I think that was kind of symbolic of a few of the mistakes that we made today. It was just so many of those small errors where, we weren't smothering or shepherding very well for each other. So that's the kind of stuff that I think fell apart. The heads dropped, and yeah, as I said earlier, that third quarter was really tough to watch. And it was that's such an easy thing to do. You give a handball, the players come from behind Logue and tackle Sheasel. So for mine, that shouldn't happen, and certainly not Sheasel's fault. And my final bad thing, I know it's hard not to have so many bad things in a game like this, but I think I'm trying to keep it grounded. Just some of those young mids drifted out of the game, which I think is to be expected, but it needs to be. I guess I hope that's the sort of thing that's getting addressed during the week. So I thought Phillips and Powell were quite good in the first quarter, and then they were a bit sporadic after that, sort of drifted out of the game. LGU, again, was good early, but not a lot of impact in quarters 2 and 3. So it's just about, for those midfielders that are developing their game, it's around that consistency. Like Neil was good all game, and I think Simpkin probably would have been good all game if he'd been able to stay out on the park. But yeah, Phillips and Powell drifted out. I think Phillips had 19 possessions. Powell ended up with 21 possessions. So, that you'd like to see them pushing into the high 20s more consistently. But that's what you get with the youth. I think we've got to take the good with the bad. And speaking of the good, let's move on to the good, because like last week, it's really easy to get bogged down in the bad stuff, but let's talk about the good. The first one is a really easy one. I know I said that forward structure was a bit questionable, but Charlie Comben and Jaden Stephenson both had really fantastic games considering we got flogged. Comben looked really likely early, just missed a couple of shots on goal. He probably should have kicked 3 or 4 in the end, but he ended with 2 goals, 3. He had 5 marks, 5 tackles, 5 hit outs. And he certainly looked like the most likely marking option in the forward line. He didn't clunk a couple early, but then he started marking him. And as I said, kicked the 2 goals, got his reward later on in the game, and did a couple of smart things or clever things. Had a tap out that, like a tap or a flick, that ended in a goal for someone else. So he looks really good. It's continued building. I thought in that Fremantle game against Fremantle, he was a nearly player. He nearly took about 7 marks, and he competed really well. And I thought he built on that today. He was only about 5 or 10% better, but the result was a lot greater. So it was a great It's great that, given Larky didn't have a great game, Comben could, I guess, stand up in his absence. And Stephenson, I talked about last week, he kicked 3 and he delivered again with 4 goals today. And it's that perfect, he only had 9 touches. And if he has 9 touches and 1 goal, you sort of go, gee, he didn't do a lot. But he had 9 touches, 8 of them are kicks, 4 goals. And again, his pressure was good. He had 2 tackles. He chased hard. And I thought he looked really dynamic again. He took advantage of the opportunities that he had. Would I like to see him probably touch it more like 14 or 15 times? Absolutely. But 4 goals, you cannot complain about. He was fantastic again, which is just great to see him playing some consistently good footy. And a lot, given that the forward structure and the inside 50s were so bad, the fact that he was able to kick 4 is a testament to that just opportunistic nature that he had about him today. He was fantastic. The next good was Sheasel. I didn't even mention Sheasel last week, and I think he had 37 last week. He had 31 today, so just a quiet one for him. He did turn it over really badly 3 or 4 times in the defensive half, but he kept back himself, and we just need to live with those kind of mistakes at this stage with Shees. You know, he kicked his first goal for his career, which was he got a 50-metre penalty and just sort of ran in and kicked it for about 48 metres. He had 7 more disposals than anyone else today. He was fantastic for the most part. He had those turnovers, but he's a young player. He's playing his 5th game, and he still looks composed. Like, sure, he kicked it straight to a Brisbane player, I reckon, 4 times, but he didn't look shaky. So I guess what I mean by that is he wasn't shaken by it. He went, all right, I missed that kick, but I'll get the next one, and he kept back himself. And I'd much prefer to see him turning it over like that and learning from it than, say, Aaron Hall, because he did that a lot. He's done that a lot over the past couple of years, Aaron Hall, and I think kind of brings a lot of that same penetration as Sheasel has been. But, I mean, Aaron Hall's not going to be here in 5 or 6 years when we're maybe looking at a premiership. So I'd prefer to, take my losses with Sheasel developing like that. And he was really good again today. He's just a ball magnet. And, I thought he was really impressive for the most part. Phillips had some fantastic composure again today with the ball in dispute. Got a handball out, or wait on the handball, and got a handball out that led to Curtis Taylor's goal at the end of the second quarter. And I mean, at that point, that kept us in the game. Now, obviously, we did not go on to win, but I just thought, in a game where he kind of drifted in and out of it, Phillips had a really good moment. And again, it's just that clean hands in the contest that we're looking to see and have replaced, because Cunnington's not going to be around for much longer. I think that's the kind of thing that we need to see. So I think it's important to highlight those kind of glimpses of the future. And the final good, it was hard to find heaps of good today. But Logue, I thought, got better as the match went on, which seems funny to say given the scoreboard really deteriorated in that second half. But I thought he looked a bit shaky early on. But he and Zeeble intercepted quite well. Given the volume of ball coming in, they both had about 8 intercept disposals, or intercept possessions rather. So yeah, I mean that was positive to see him adjusting, I guess, as the match went on and taking a couple of intercept marks. He was okay, I thought, in the defence, and Zeeble was okay as well. To be honest, there was a few that were not. And Mackay, it's not really good, but I think he'll be better for the run. He looked really rusty. So hopefully he'll be better after blowing the cobwebs out. So let's have a look at just a couple of news stories or things from during the week. If you're keeping up with your North Melbourne news, you would have seen that Taron Thomas has found his way into the headlines again. And I just don't know where we go from here with Taron. He's a tremendously talented player. We've invested quite a lot in him, but he just keeps making off-field mistakes. And I think, it's really hard to keep supporting him with that, I guess. So during the week, he was caught on Instagram, I guess, driving on the wrong side of the road, had his feet up on the dash, filming himself as he's driving. And You know, like if that's the one mistake the player makes, go, all right, that's a silly mistake. Let's move on from it. But you know, it's really adding up with him. And then he was interviewed by Channel 7 as a result of that, and I didn't think he didn't really apologise very well, I guess. Like, he didn't come across like he was super apologetic about it. He just came across as almost a bit childish, to be honest. Like, he was just wanted to get back out there with the boys and maybe not understanding the gravity of the situation. So, look, I really hope for his sake that the club supports him and continues to support him, but I just don't know how I'd feel about having Taron Thomas go out there and play for us at the moment, even though he's arguably our most talented young player, which is it's really unfortunate. You want players like that to be out in the park and setting a good example, and I'd find it hard to barrack for him at the moment, unfortunately. So I think it's just a bit of a wait and watch to see what North Melbourne does with him. I know he's contracted for the rest of this year and next year, and on some pretty big money. So going to be pretty hard to make a decision on that one. But I can't see him getting a game for the seniors in the short term. And just the other thing that I guess I want to talk about that's coming up is Todd Goldstein's 300th is next week, which I guess it's such a fantastic 300s. Really, there's not many players that make it to 300. It's a massive achievement. I think it's something like the 100th or 99th player to make it to 300 games. It's really a remarkable achievement, particularly for a ruckman. So, congratulations, Todd. I know the last couple of years he's come up in trade talks around, will he potentially move to Geelong, or is North Melbourne going to try and trade him out for a bit of currency, while we still could. And who knows, like if he'd gone to Geelong, there's probably a good chance that he's a premiership player, but I'm certainly really pleased for him that he's stayed loyal to the club and, stuck fat through some pretty lean times over the past couple of years. And hopefully, hopefully he can help these young ruckman in Cherry and Coleman Jones come through and I guess replace him. I would think that this year or next year would be his last. And I know he missed round one. Cherry got picked ahead of him and then unfortunately hurt his ankle, so he's been out for a bit. Coleman Jones has played in the VFL this weekend, so sort of making a bit of a return from his injury. Like, I'm not sure that he's going to take Goldie's spot, but yeah, I think it's fantastic that he's going to make the 300, and hopefully he can help our developing ruckman throughout the rest of this year, and who knows, maybe into next year, we'll see. But yeah, it's a fantastic effort. Let's turn our attention to the next match now, which is the Gold Coast Suns on Sunday afternoon in the Gold Coast. A really winnable game for that milestone for Goldie. I think the Suns have looked all right this year, but not great. They probably should have beaten Fremantle this weekend, but they just imploded late in that game and got run over the top of. So yeah, I think it's a really winnable game for North to maybe get back to an even ledger of 3-3. It's going to be really interesting to see what happens there. I think, yeah, it's fascinating. The VFL team had a really solid win against Sydney, so there's potentially some players that, could come back in. I know Paul Curtis played well. He kicked 5 goals for the VFL, but part of me wouldn't mind just giving him a couple more in the VFL. I think once you send a player like that back to the VFL, you don't want to just flip and flop them, I don't think. Those younger players, I think it's fantastic that he's gone back and be able to find some form and kick 5. And if he comes back in, great. But I don't think Paul Curtis coming in is going to be the difference next week. So I wouldn't mind seeing him have a couple more in the VFL, really get some consistent, solid form, and then come back in running hot. So just, I guess, in terms of selection for next week, I know I was pretty harsh on Daniel Howe last week, and I sort of owe him a bit of an apology, I think. He looked better against Brisbane, particularly early. He was running hot early, had quite a few possessions, and looked relatively solid. Like, I wouldn't say his disposal was amazing, but he looked better than he has in previous weeks. He actually had 23 touches, which was third most for North, and took a couple of marks, had a couple of tackles. So he was okay. Probably has earned his spot for next week, I would say. Turner was quiet, Zerha was quiet. So if we're looking at, I can't see Zerha getting dropped after one quiet game, given he had a great game against Carlton. But Turner, I thought if Paul Curtis was going to come back in, for example, maybe Turner hasn't done much over the last couple of weeks. I think he's a great spiritual leader, Kane Turner. But if we're looking for someone to maybe drop out, he could be it. And I mean, who knows what's going to happen with Simpkin? It looked like, he certainly got subbed out pretty quickly. If he's broken his hand, you'd think he's going to miss a couple. So that potentially, the door opens potentially for another midfielder to come in. Greenwood was the sub again, and he looked okay when he came on. So, it's not quite a straight swap, but they're certainly both good inside mids, Simpkin and Greenwood. I just think that Simpkin gives you a bit more on the outside, a bit more class. In terms of other players from the VFL, Hall's a possible in, but I think he had something like 35 touches and kicked a goal. But I would prefer a younger players getting a game time than him, I think, at this point. I actually quite like Aaron Hall. I think he's a great bloke, and he's played some great footy for us the last couple of years. I just, I'd probably prefer to see a Bergman or a Go to come in and get that experience ahead of Hall, but certainly he would be someone that could come in, because I think, as I said, I think it's a winnable game against the Gold Coast Suns. I'd be really, really interested to see how we go, whereas coming into this Brisbane game, I was sort of, hoping for a kind of 3 or 4 goal loss, which we know didn't happen. So that brings me to the end of the podcast for today. Thanks if you've made it this far. I know it wasn't as upbeat podcast as episode 1. It's kind of hard to be upbeat when you get beaten so thoroughly, but thanks for making it this far and giving it a listen. Just again, please give me a subscribe and share this podcast with any North Melbourne fans that you do know. Every share helps. And please get involved, leave me some feedback, get involved in the comment sections on those social media posts. Let me know what you want to see from the podcast and how you thought the North Melbourne boys went. Yeah, let's head up to the Gold Coast next week and put on hopefully a much better performance, and Comben can keep clunking him, LDU can keep clearing him, and we can hopefully come back with a win and get that 3-3 ledger and march on to finals. Go Roos.